Imagine standing on a hill at dawn, the world before you untouched and wild. The air is crisp, filled with the earthy scent of morning dew, and the sound of birdsong mingles with the whisper of the wind. Below you, the land stretches out like an ancient painting, full of mysteries that have yet to be uncovered. There are no roads, no towering structures, no signs of human civilization. Just the vast, unbroken expanse of nature, alive, dynamic, and free. This was the world our ancestors inhabited, a world where humanity was not yet separate from the land, but an integral part of it. The sky above and the ground below told stories of a time when humans were not masters of the earth, but humble participants in its endless cycle. In this world, the forces of nature held sway. The sun rose and set as it had for eons, casting its light on landscapes that ranged from the frozen tundras of the north to the dense forests and vast grasslands further south. The earth was still in the grip of the tail end of the Ice Age, a period marked by dramatic shifts in climate, the ebb and flow of glaciers, and the domination of towering ice sheets. But even as the planet's climate began to warm and the ice receded, the world of our ancestors remained one of constant change, a place where survival depended on understanding the rhythms of the land. The ancient forests, wild rivers, and open plains were more than just backdrops. They were the stage for an intricate drama of life and death, survival and extinction. Here, humanity lived in a delicate balance with its environment, a world where every step, every decision, could be the difference between life and death. But what would it have been like to live in such a time, without the comforts of modern civilization, without cities or technologies to shield you from the elements? What would it feel like to be a human being, waking up each day in a world that was as much a threat as it was a home? The landscape of this pre-civilized Earth was not shaped by the hand of human ambition, but by the slow, patient work of nature. The great mountain ranges, the vast plains that stretched for miles, the dense forests that harbored both danger and wonder. These were the realms our ancestors navigated, sometimes with awe, sometimes with trepidation. The wild, untamed land held both beauty and peril in equal measure, and the very forces that gave life to the earth could just as easily take it away. For those who lived before the rise of cities, life was a daily negotiation with the natural world. People lived in small groups, often no larger than a few dozen individuals, forming tight-knit communities where survival depended on cooperation and shared knowledge. These early human bands were not bound by the constraints of urban living or the structured hierarchies that would later define civilizations. Instead, their existence was centered around the immediate needs of survival: food, shelter, and protection from the elements. Every day was a quest to find enough to eat, to ensure safety from predators, and to maintain the delicate balance that allowed them to thrive in an unpredictable world. This was not a life devoid of meaning or culture. Even in this world of raw survival, humans began to express themselves in ways that would eventually form the foundation of what we think of as civilization. The first stone tools, simple but effective, were crafted to hunt, gather, and survive. The first fires were kindled not just for warmth, but for light, for cooking, and for the sense of security they brought to the people huddled around them. And through it all, there was the deep connection to the land itself. The world was not just a resource to be exploited, it was a living entity, full of spiritual significance. For early humans, the land was a place of reverence, not just a backdrop for their survival, but a partner in their existence. Life before cities was a world shaped by the elements, and the very unpredictability of nature forced early humans to develop a deep understanding of their environment. They learned to read the stars, to track the movements of animals, and to predict the weather by the patterns of the wind or the clouds. Knowledge was passed down through generations, a silent code that governed their survival. And yet, it was not just practical knowledge. There was something deeper at work in the human psyche, something that transcended the immediate concerns of food and shelter. There was a sense of awe, a sense of connection to the earth, a recognition that life itself was fragile and that all living things were part of an interconnected web. This deep connection to the natural world was reflected in the spiritual beliefs of early humans. Before the establishment of organized religions, before the rise of temples or churches, early humans practiced animism, a belief that all things in nature, trees, animals, rocks, and rivers, had a spirit or essence. This belief was not born out of abstract philosophy, but out of a lived reality. Early humans knew that the land and the creatures on it were both their allies and their adversaries. The powerful buffalo or mammoth was both a source of food and a dangerous adversary, and the river that brought life could also flood and destroy. Life in the wild was a constant reminder that nature could be both nurturing and unforgiving. The presence of megafauna, creatures that are now extinct, was another defining feature of this ancient world. Mammoths, saber-toothed cats, and giant sloths roamed the earth alongside early humans, creating a dramatic and sometimes dangerous relationship between predator and prey. But these creatures were more than just obstacles to survival. They were also symbols of the world's wildness, and in many ways, they shaped human culture. These early humans hunted these great beasts, not only for their meat and hides, but also for the deep significance they carried. The hunt itself was a ritual, a sacred act that brought communities together, forged bonds, and marked milestones in the lives of the people who lived on the edge of the wild. For early humans, the world was not divided into human-made spaces and wilderness. There was no clear line between civilization and the wild, no separation between people and the natural world. Instead, early humans lived in a constant relationship with their environment, learning its secrets, adapting to its challenges, and finding meaning in its mysteries. They did not build cities or structures to dominate the land, but instead learned to live with it, moving with the rhythms of nature, shaping their lives to fit the world rather than forcing the world to fit them. This way of life was slow, methodical, and often precarious. But it was also beautiful in its simplicity, and it created a profound sense of connection to the land and to each other. In a world without cities, without technology, without the comforts and distractions of modern life, early humans lived in a way that was deeply attuned to the rhythms of the earth. Every day was an encounter with the unknown, a journey of survival and discovery, and in that simplicity, there was a sense of wonder, a sense that life, in all its rawness, was enough. In many ways, this was a life lived at the edge of what we would now call civilization. It was a world of struggle and uncertainty, but also one of profound beauty and connection. The dawn of human civilization, the rise of agriculture, the building of cities, the creation of written language, was still millennia away, but the foundations for these great transformations were being laid in the lives of early humans, who lived not as masters of the earth, but as humble participants in its vast, ancient dance. The world before cities was a world of awe, wonder, and survival. It was a world where humanity's place in the grand scheme of things was still being defined, where the boundaries between human and nature had not yet been drawn. It was a world that existed on the edge of everything we now take for granted, but one that holds the keys to understanding the roots of who we are today. In this wild, untamed world, our ancestors began the long journey that would eventually lead to the rise of civilization, and perhaps, in some ways, they understood the value of this journey more deeply than we do now. The Ice Age was a time of monumental shifts, both in the climate and the creatures that roamed the earth. For millions of years, great sheets of ice blanketed the northern parts of the planet, reshaping the landscapes and creating a world that was far colder and more hostile than the one we know today. The cold was a force that seemed to dominate the planet, shaping not only the geography, but also the course of life itself. The animals that lived during this period were adapted to survive in a world of extremes, massive creatures, built to endure the harshest conditions. And yet, for all their strength and size, they were not invincible. Among these creatures were the mammoths, towering behemoths covered in shaggy fur, with long, spiraled tusks that curved outwards like the arms of ancient trees. These giant animals were the icons of the Ice Age, roaming the vast, frozen plains in massive herds, grazing on the tough, fibrous grasses that were all that grew in the icy expanse. The mammoth was a creature that symbolized the power and majesty of the prehistoric world, an animal that seemed as much a part of the frozen landscape as the ice itself. Yet, for all their grandeur, mammoths were also vulnerable. They depended on a fragile balance in the ecosystem, the right kind of vegetation, the right climate, And when that balance shifted, their world was thrown into turmoil. In the shadow of the mammoth stood the saber-toothed tiger, its elongated fangs glinting like knives in the low light of dawn. The saber-toothed cat was not just a predator. It was a symbol of the fierce competition that existed between the creatures of the Ice Age. These cats were formidable hunters, stalking their prey with silent grace before pouncing with lethal force. They were perfectly adapted to the cold environment, their muscular frames and sharp teeth designed to bring down prey with terrifying efficiency. But like the mammoths, the saber-tooths were not invulnerable. They too faced the shifting tides of climate change, and as the world warmed and their prey became scarce, their reign came to an end. The extinction of these great creatures is one of the most poignant mysteries of prehistoric life. What caused the sudden disappearance of so many species, especially the mammoths and saber-tooths, which had been dominant in the Ice Age ecosystem? Some scientists suggest that climate change was the primary culprit. As the Earth warmed, the icy expanse that had supported these creatures began to shrink, and the grasslands they relied on for food started to vanish. In addition, as the climate changed, new ecosystems emerged that favored different kinds of animals that were better suited to the new conditions. The mammoths, with their thick fur and enormous size, could no longer thrive in the warmer world that was unfolding. But climate change alone may not have been enough to account for their extinction. The arrival of humans in these environments added another layer of complexity to the story. Early humans had begun to spread across the globe, migrating out of Africa and into the frozen wilderness of the northern latitudes. As hunter-gatherers, they began to hunt the same animals that had once ruled the land. The mammoths, with their massive size and slow movements, made for an easy target, especially for early humans armed with tools like spears and bows. While there is no conclusive evidence to suggest that humans were directly responsible for the extinction of the mammoth, it is clear that the arrival of humans in these ecosystems added an additional pressure that many species could not withstand. The story of the Ice Age is not just a story of extinction, however. It is also a story of adaptation, survival, and resilience. As the climate changed and the world warmed, many species found new ways to survive, adapting to the shifting landscape in ways that allowed them to continue to thrive. Early humans, for example, learned to adapt to the changing climate, developing new tools and techniques for hunting and gathering. They learned to track animals, to understand the rhythms of nature, and to live in a way that was in tune with the cycles of the seasons. But survival was not guaranteed. The extinction of the mammoth and the saber-toothed cat was a reminder of the fragility of life. Even the most powerful creatures could be brought low by the forces of nature, forces that were beyond their control. The Ice Age, for all its challenges, was a time of both incredible beauty and incredible violence. A time when the creatures of the earth had to adapt or perish, and for early humans, it was a time when they had to learn to coexist with these powerful animals, sometimes as allies and sometimes as competitors. As the great beasts of the Ice Age vanished, the landscape began to change. The cold that had gripped the earth for so long began to loosen its hold, and new ecosystems emerged. Forests spread where ice had once ruled, and the great plains of the mammoths became home to new species of animals. The warming climate brought with it new challenges and new opportunities, and the survivors of the Ice Age, both human and animal, were forced to adapt once again. The world that emerged from the Ice Age was one that was different in many ways from the world that had existed before, but it was also a world that held echoes of the past. The extinction of the mammoth and the saber-toothed cat was not just the end of a chapter in the story of life on Earth. It was a turning point, a moment when the world shifted and new possibilities began to emerge. The extinction of the megafauna marked the end of an era, but it also opened the door to new possibilities for the survivors. For early humans, the loss of the great beasts did not signal the end of their journey. It was merely a new chapter. The Earth was still full of life, full of new challenges and new creatures to encounter. The end of the Ice Age was a time of transformation, not just for the planet's animals, but for humans as well. It was a time when humans learned to adapt to new environments, to navigate new terrains, and to find new ways to survive. For the human spirit, The extinction of the megafauna was not the end. It was the beginning of something else. As the great beasts faded into memory, the story of humanity continued. The skills that humans had owned during the Ice Age, the ability to hunt, to gather, to adapt, would serve them well in the coming millennia. The extinction of the mammoths and saber-tooths was a tragedy, but it was also a sign of the ever-changing nature of life on Earth. The forces that had once shaped the planet were not static. They were always in motion, always shifting, creating new landscapes and new challenges. In the end, the extinction of these ancient creatures was not just the loss of an era. It was a reminder that life on Earth is a constant cycle of change and transformation. For early humans, it was a challenge they had to meet head-on, adapting to a world that was constantly shifting beneath their feet. The loss of the mammoth and the saber-tooth was a part of that cycle. But it was not the end of the journey. The story of life before cities, of early humans living in a world that was both wild and unpredictable, continued to unfold. And as they faced the challenges of a new world, they carried with them the lessons of the past, lessons of survival, of resilience, and of the ever-present need to adapt. Before the rise of agriculture, before cities, before the written word, the story of humanity was written in the rhythms of nature, in the hunt, and in the cycles of survival. It was a world where people lived not by choice but by necessity, moving in tune with the land, following the migrations of animals, and responding to the whims of nature. The early humans who inhabited this world were not yet the rulers of the planet. They were part of a vast, complex ecosystem that stretched from the frozen tundras to the sunlit savannas. In a world that offered both beauty and brutality, these early humans had to rely on their wits, their adaptability, and the resources around them to survive. The life of a hunter-gatherer was dictated by the forces of nature. It was a life lived without the cushion of modern comforts, where survival depended on understanding the land and adapting to its constantly changing conditions. There were no grocery stores, no supermarkets, no easy access to the food and materials that we take for granted today. Every day was a new challenge, and the stakes were high. A missed hunt, a poor harvest of berries, or a late arrival of seasonal resources could mean starvation or death. The hunter-gatherers lived in a world where every success was hard-earned, every victory small but vital. Life was inherently unpredictable, and the human experience was shaped by the delicate balance between life and death, survival and failure. The early humans were not just surviving, they were learning, experimenting, and evolving. In the absence of written language, knowledge was passed down through oral traditions, through stories, and through the lived experiences of each generation. Every day, in a hunter-gatherer community, was a lesson on how to track animals, how to navigate the changing seasons, how to stay safe from predators, and how to live off the land without exhausting it. These skills were not just practical, they were deeply intertwined with the survival of the group, with the bonds between individuals, and with the very fabric of early human culture. Hunting was not just about food, it was a communal activity that brought people together. The hunt was a time for cooperation, for the exchange of knowledge, and for the forging of relationships. Hunting strategies were learned through experience and shared knowledge. The best hunters passed down their wisdom, teaching the younger members of the tribe how to track animals, how to anticipate their movements, and how to use the environment to their advantage. This was a world where every piece of knowledge was valuable, every skill essential, and every day an opportunity to learn something new. Success in the hunt meant food and survival, but it also meant the strengthening of social bonds, the reaffirmation of roles within the community, and the sharing of resources that kept the group alive. But hunting was not without its dangers. Early humans faced a constant threat from predators, animals that saw them as prey, as well as the elements themselves. The world was still wild, and even the most skilled hunters had to be wary of the dangers lurking around them. Large predators like the saber-toothed cat or the cave bear roamed the same territory, and there was no safety net to protect early humans from the unpredictable nature of these animals. The hunt was a risk, a gamble, but it was a gamble they had to take. The constant presence of danger shaped the psyche of early humans, teaching them the value of caution, the importance of cooperation, and the necessity of vigilance. The landscape in which these early humans lived was as diverse as the creatures that roamed it. From the dense forests of the north to the open plains of the south, early humans adapted to a wide range of environments. In the forests, they would have hunted small game, foraged for fruits, nuts, and berries, and gathered wood for shelter and fire. In the open plains, they would have tracked large herds of animals, bison, deer, or the mighty mammoth. The environment shaped every aspect of life, from the tools they used to the food they ate, to the social structures they created. The tools of the hunter-gatherer were simple but effective. Stone knives, axes, and spears were crafted with an expert hand, honed to perfection by generations of trial and error. These tools were not just for killing. They were for processing food, for building shelter, and for carving out a life in a world that was both beautiful and harsh. Early humans were resourceful, using every part of the animals they killed. The meat provided sustenance, the bones were fashioned into tools, the hides were turned into clothing and shelter. The ability to use every resource available was a key factor in their survival, and it was a skill that would be passed down for generations. While hunting was a major part of life, gathering was equally important. The cycle of nature dictated that food was not always easy to come by, and the availability of different resources varied depending on the season. Early humans would have spent a significant amount of time gathering fruits, nuts, berries, roots, and other plant materials. These foods not only supplemented the diet, but also provided essential vitamins and nutrients that helped sustain the community. Gathering also meant that people had to be deeply in tune with the land, knowing when and where to find food and understanding the rhythms of plant life. The success of a group could depend as much on the ability to gather food as it did on the ability to hunt. The seasonal cycles were key to the survival of early humans. Life was lived in close connection with the land's rhythms. Spring brought new plant life and animals to hunt. Summer meant plenty of food. Fall required preparation for the winter, and winter was a time of endurance and survival. The seasons dictated movement. Groups would often migrate in search of food, following the herds, or moving to areas with better access to resources. This nomadic lifestyle was essential for their survival, allowing them to take advantage of different environments at different times of the year. But beyond survival, the life of a hunter-gatherer was deeply spiritual. The world was not simply a backdrop for human activity. It was imbued with meaning. Animals were not just sources of food. They were sacred beings, part of a spiritual order that was deeply tied to the natural world. Early humans had a profound respect for the animals they hunted, often viewing the hunt as a ritual, a sacred act that required reciprocity. The practice of animism, believing that all things in nature, from the smallest stone to the mightiest mammoth, had a spirit, was common among early human groups. The hunt was not just a means of survival. It was a way of connecting with the world on a deeper level, acknowledging the interdependence between humans, animals, and the land. Rituals and ceremonies were likely an integral part of hunter-gatherer life. These rituals would have been performed to honor the spirits of the animals they hunted, to ask for safe passage through the land, or to mark the changing of the seasons. The evidence of these beliefs can be seen in the cave paintings, carvings, and figurines that have been discovered around the world. These artifacts are not just remnants of a distant past. They are windows into the spiritual lives of early humans, providing us with glimpses of the ways they saw the world and their place within it. The life of a hunter-gatherer was, in many ways, a life lived on the edge. There were few guarantees: food, shelter, safety, all were constantly at risk. Yet, it was also a life filled with beauty, wonder, and a deep connection to the world around them. These early humans were part of a vast, intricate web of life, connected to the land, the animals, and each other. They had no cities, no permanent structures, and no written history. But they had something equally important: a profound understanding of the natural world, a culture built on cooperation, and a connection to the earth that would shape humanity's relationship with the planet for millennia to come. In the end, the hunter-gatherer lifestyle was more than just a means of survival. It was a way of living that acknowledged the fragility of life, the importance of community, and the deep interconnection of all living things. It was a life where every day was a chance to learn, to adapt, and to survive in a world that was as much about mystery and wonder as it was about hardship and danger. And in this life, humanity began to define itself, not through cities or civilizations, but through the land, the animals, and the shared experience of survival. Before humanity ever dreamt of shaping the landscape with cities and civilizations, there was a time when survival itself was the ultimate human achievement. In this raw, untamed world, early humans had to rely on their ingenuity, resilience, and deep connection to nature. The key to their survival lay not just in their physical strength or speed, but in their ability to create tools simple, effective, and often remarkably sophisticated for their time. Tools became the linchpin in the story of early human evolution, a mark of humanity's intelligence and adaptability. The first tools were born from necessity, driven by the basic need to hunt, gather, and protect. Early tools used by human ancestors were far from what we might envision today. There were no machines or sophisticated devices, no metal alloys or advanced engineering. What they had was stone. Stone tools were the first, and perhaps the most enduring artifacts left by our ancestors, scattered throughout the archaeological record like breadcrumbs, leading us back through the fog of time. These stone tools were simple by modern standards, but their creation marked a monumental leap in human development. It was through these tools that early humans could not only interact with their environment, but begin to shape it to their advantage. The very first stone tools were nothing more than sharp-edged rocks, struck with precision to create cutting surfaces. These tools, known as Old Owen tools, were crafted around 2.6 million years ago and were simple yet effective. A single rock, chipped to form a sharp edge, became a weapon, a tool for hunting, and an instrument for gathering food. The beauty of these tools lay in their simplicity, their effectiveness in meeting the basic needs of survival. Early humans used these tools for a variety of purposes: scraping meat off bones, breaking open hard-shelled nuts, cutting wood, and even processing plant material. The precision with which early humans crafted these tools demonstrated a sophisticated understanding of the materials they were working with. As time passed, the stone tools grew more specialized and refined. Early humans learned to shape their tools with greater sophistication, crafting hand axes and spears from larger stones. These tools were not just functional, they were signs of growing intelligence and the ability to manipulate the environment. The Acheulean tools, which appeared around 1.5 million years ago, were far more advanced than their predecessors. The hand axes of the Acheulean period were carefully crafted, often with symmetrical shapes that demonstrated not only a practical understanding of form, but also a sense of design. These tools were designed for a more specific purpose: hunting large animals and processing carcasses. Their sharp edges were perfect for cutting through tough hide and muscle, while their weight and sturdiness made them excellent for butchering. Creating these tools was not an instinctive action. It was a learned skill. To craft these early tools, early humans needed patience, precision, and foresight. They needed to understand the properties of the stones they were using, their hardness, their sharpness, and how best to fracture them. The act of creating tools was, in many ways, a test of intelligence, and it was a skill that would be passed down through generations. But it was not just the creation of tools that marked an important leap in human development. It was the use of those tools to change the environment around them. Earliest humans did not just live in the world, they began to shape it. This transformation was not limited to the tools themselves, but extended to the very way early humans lived. The use of stone tools allowed early humans to hunt larger game, process food more efficiently, and protect themselves from predators. The ability to make and use tools meant that they could venture into new environments, hunting larger animals or processing food that would otherwise have been inedible. With sharper tools, early humans could create weapons to hunt or defend themselves, like spears and clubs, and fashion shelters to protect themselves from the elements. The tools were not limited to just the immediate tasks of survival. They were also integral to the culture and social dynamics of early human communities. Toolmaking became a shared activity, a communal effort that required cooperation and the exchange of knowledge. As early humans owned their skills in crafting tools, They also began to develop social structures, passing down knowledge from one generation to the next. The ability to create specialized tools was a skill that brought people together, and the act of hunting and gathering using these tools often required the coordinated effort of multiple individuals. Early humans did not just survive. They learned to thrive through cooperation, learning from one another, and building on the knowledge passed down through generations. The creation of tools also marks the beginning of what we might call cultural innovation. Early humans began to experiment with the materials around them, not just to meet their immediate needs, but to satisfy their curiosity and explore new possibilities. The crafting of stone tools led to the discovery of other materials that could be shaped and used in the same way. Bone, wood, and eventually, the discovery of fire. Early humans began to harness fire for warmth, light, and cooking, and soon after, they learned to fashion tools from materials other than stone tools that would be lighter, sharper, and more versatile. The use of bone, antler, and wood in toolmaking would evolve, leading to the creation of spears, fishhooks, needles, and eventually, the rise of more complex technologies that set the stage for the development of civilization. Even the very act of using tools to shape the world began to create an understanding of cause and effect. The successful use of a tool, whether it was a sharpened flint used to hunt game, a stone axe used to chop wood, or a bone needle used to sew clothing, taught early humans the power of intention. This was not just a matter of brute strength. It was about thoughtful action, about understanding that the world could be changed through a combination of knowledge, skill, and perseverance. Early humans understood that their tools were extensions of themselves, objects that amplified their abilities and enabled them to transcend the limitations of their bodies. As humans moved from the Oldowan tools to the Acheulean hand axes, and eventually to more specialized implements, we see not just the evolution of technology, but the evolution of thought itself. These tools represented more than just physical progress. They were a reflection of the growing sophistication of the human mind. The creation of a specialized tool for a specific task required foresight, planning, and problem solving. The act of shaping stone and other materials was not just a practical task, it was an intellectual one. Humans were thinking beyond immediate needs, considering how best to use available resources, how to adapt their tools to different environments, and how to pass this knowledge on to future generations. Earliest tools were not just the markers of survival, they were the building blocks of humanity's ability to create. As humans crafted tools, they learned to craft their world. Each tool, from the simplest flint scraper to the most sophisticated spear, represented a step toward understanding the world not as a collection of random forces, but as something that could be understood, manipulated, and shaped. Through these tools, early humans began to assert their presence on the world, marking the beginning of humanity's long journey from living alongside nature to altering it. These tools also laid the groundwork for the development of even more complex technologies. The basic principles of tool making, shaping, sharpening, using resources efficiently would eventually lead to the creation of the wheel, the development of agriculture, and the rise of craftsmanship that defined the first civilizations. But the journey from the earliest stone tools to the complex technologies of the modern world is long, and it begins here, in the simple yet profound act of chipping stone to create the tools that would change the course of human history forever. In many ways, the story of early human toolmaking is the story of humanity's unfolding potential. From the first crude stone tools to the specialized implements used in hunting, building, and crafting, these tools were both practical necessities and the beginnings of cultural evolution. They allowed early humans to engage with their environment in ways that no other species could, and they set the stage for the development of the complex societies that would one day arise. As we look back on these first tools, we see not just evidence of survival, but the seeds of something far greater, the birth of human innovation, creativity, and the drive to shape the world around us. In the vast expanse of the natural world, early humans were constantly learning to navigate and adapt to the ever-changing environment that surrounded them. Unlike the modern world, where cities and technologies dominate the landscape, the earth that our ancestors walked was a place of wild beauty. fraught with challenges. From dense forests to vast open plains, early humans lived in a world where the landscape was both a source of sustenance and a constant threat. The rhythm of life was defined by the seasons, by the rise and fall of the sun, and by the animals that roamed the land, creatures that were as essential to human survival as they were dangerous. Survival in this world was not just about hunting and gathering. It was about reading the land, understanding the subtle signs of nature, and knowing when to act. Early humans were deeply attuned to the environment around them, their lives governed by cycles that were entirely dependent on the natural world. The world they inhabited was one of great uncertainty, where food and shelter were never guaranteed, and where the landscape could shift overnight with the changing weather, the arrival of new predators, or the migration of prey. In this unpredictable world, early humans had to develop an intimate understanding of the animals they shared the land with. From the towering mammoths that roamed the cold steppes to the nimble deer that moved through the forests, animals were not just a source of food. They were an integral part of the human story. To survive, early humans needed to know how to track animals, when and where to hunt them, and how to use every part of the creature they caught. The act of hunting was not just about physical prowess, but about an acute awareness of the land and the creatures within it. Tracking was one of the most critical skills that early humans owned, and it was essential for both hunting and survival. It was not just about following footprints or scat. It was about reading the land, noticing subtle signs that others might overlook. Every bent twig, every disturbed patch of earth, every broken branch told a story. A skilled tracker could read the landscape like a map, understanding the movements of animals and the rhythms of nature. The ability to track prey was also an act of patience and endurance. It was not a quick process, but one that required hours of observation, a keen eye, and an understanding of the animal's habits and routines. A human hunter might follow an animal's trail for miles, adjusting their pace and strategy as they moved, always staying a step ahead. The relationship between early humans and the animals they hunted was one of respect and necessity. Humans were not simply predators in the way that large carnivores like saber-toothed cats were. They were part of the ecosystem, working within its delicate balance. To ensure their survival, early humans had to respect the cycles of nature. Hunting was not just about taking. It was about reciprocity, about understanding that the animals they hunted were living beings with their own place in the world. In many early cultures, hunting was not just a physical act, it was a spiritual one. Rituals were often performed before and after the hunt, thanking the animals for their sacrifice and honoring them as part of the natural order. This reverence for animals can be seen in the cave paintings and carvings that have been discovered in ancient sites, where animals were depicted not just as prey, but as symbols of the spiritual connection between humans and the natural world. While hunting was a key part of early human life, it was not the only way early humans interacted with the land. Gathering was just as important, if not more so. The landscapes that early humans traversed were filled with a vast array of plant life, and understanding which plants were edible, which were medicinal, and which were poisonous was essential for survival. Knowledge of plants was passed down through generations, and early humans had an extensive repertoire of plant-based foods and remedies at their disposal. From berries and roots to seeds and tree bark, the land provided a diverse range of sustenance. Gathering was a seasonal activity, with different plants becoming available at different times of the year. The ability to identify and gather plants at the right time required intimate knowledge of the land and its rhythms. The relationship between early humans and the environment was one of harmony and adaptation. Early humans were not conquerors of the land, as we might think of modern civilization's relationship with nature, but rather part of a larger ecosystem. They understood that the world around them was a living, breathing entity, constantly shifting and changing. The animals, the plants, and even the weather were all interconnected, each part of a larger web that had to be respected and understood in order to survive. Humans were not just surviving in this environment, they were learning from it, adapting to its ever-changing conditions, and building a culture that was deeply connected to the world around them. This deep connection to the land was reflected in the way early humans lived. Their homes were not permanent structures. but temporary shelters, often made from materials that could be easily gathered from the environment: branches, leaves, animal hides, and stone. These shelters were designed to blend in with the landscape, offering protection from the elements without leaving a lasting imprint on the land. The nomadic lifestyle of early humans meant that they were constantly moving, following the migration of animals or the changing seasons. This movement was not aimless. It was dictated by the needs of survival and the rhythms of nature. The environment also played a crucial role in shaping early human societies. The availability of resources, the climate, and the geography of the land all influenced where early humans settled and how they lived. In areas where resources were abundant, humans could settle for longer periods, building more permanent shelters and developing more complex social structures. In other areas, where resources were scarcer or more unpredictable, humans were forced to move frequently, living in smaller, more fluid social groups. This nomadic lifestyle was both a challenge and an advantage. It allowed early humans to adapt to a wide range of environments, but it also required a deep understanding of the land and a constant awareness of the changing seasons and the availability of resources. Over time, these early human groups began to develop systems of social organization that allowed them to work together more efficiently. While the bonds between family members and close kin were always at the heart of human society, early humans began to form larger social groups, often based around shared resources or common goals like hunting. The ability to cooperate in groups was essential for survival, especially when hunting large game or gathering food from multiple sources. This cooperation led to the development of social roles, with some individuals becoming specialists in certain tasks, such as tracking, hunting, or gathering. Social structures became more complex as the need for coordination and division of labor increased. The environment also shaped the ways in which early humans interacted with the world beyond their immediate surroundings. Early humans were not isolated from other groups. They interacted with neighboring tribes, traded resources, and exchanged knowledge. This exchange was essential for survival, as it allowed groups to access resources that might not have been available in their immediate environment. Trade networks, although rudimentary, began to form as humans traveled and interacted with one another. These interactions laid the foundation for the development of larger networks of communication and trade, which would eventually lead to the rise of more complex societies. However, it was not just the physical environment that shaped early humans. Their emotional and psychological connections to the world around them were equally important. The wilderness was both a source of sustenance and a constant challenge, and early humans learned to respect its dangers and embrace its beauty. The ever-present awareness of mortality, the constant need for vigilance, and the understanding that life was fragile, all of these factors contributed to the development of early human culture, shaping beliefs, practices, and rituals. Through it all, early humans lived in a world of constant change, where survival was never guaranteed, but where knowledge, cooperation, and respect for the land were the keys to living in harmony with nature. The land and its creatures were not just resources to be exploited. They were partners in the ongoing dance of survival, teaching early humans the value of patience, resilience, and adaptation. And as these early humans adapted to their environment, they began to lay the groundwork for the future, creating a deep connection to the earth that would continue to shape the course of human history for millennia to come. As early humans adapted to the rhythms of the natural world, their survival strategies began to take on more complexity. The once simple existence of hunting, gathering, and living with the land transformed as the human experience itself evolved. Survival was still at the forefront, but with every passing generation, early humans learned to harness new technologies, explore more efficient ways to use resources, and build upon the knowledge passed down by their ancestors. At the heart of this change was the growing understanding that nature was not just a backdrop to human life, but an active participant in shaping humanity's future. The growing relationship between early humans and the land was more than a mere connection to the environment. It was a dynamic partnership, one that enabled humans to expand their reach, thrive in varied landscapes, and learn to master survival in increasingly diverse conditions. The mastery of fire, one of humanity's most transformative discoveries, stands as a testament to this growing mastery over nature. Fire provided early humans not only warmth and light, but also a means to cook food, ward off predators, and forge tools in ways that had previously been impossible. Its discovery, likely millions of years ago, marked a monumental step in human evolution, a tool so powerful it altered the course of human development. Cooking with fire was a game changer in itself. While food provided sustenance, it did not fully unlock the potential of available nutrition in the same way that fire did. Cooking made food more digestible and allowed early humans to extract more calories and nutrients, which would have been a significant advantage in a world where energy was a constant concern. Meat cooked over a fire would have been much easier to chew and digest than raw meat, while plants and tubers could be softened and made more palatable. This not only made food more nourishing, but it also expanded the types of foods early humans could consume, opening up previously unavailable resources in the natural world. As important as fire was to early human survival, it also marked the beginning of another significant aspect of human development: the ability to shape the environment, not just live within it. Fire allowed early humans to manipulate their surroundings in ways they had not been able to before. They could clear dense forests for better hunting grounds or to create spaces for their temporary shelters. They could use fire to shape wood into tools, bend materials like bone and antler, and even begin experimenting with early forms of metallurgy. Early humans did not just use the world, they began to mold it to suit their needs. This growing mastery over nature marked the first steps towards civilization itself, a civilization that would emerge in the form of permanent settlements, agriculture, and eventually cities, but one that started with humans becoming stewards of the environment they inhabited. As humans adapted to the ever-changing conditions of the natural world, they also began to form more complex social structures. Small, familial bands evolved into larger, more organized groups. Early human societies were not just defined by their relationship to nature, they were increasingly defined by their relationship to one another. Social bonds were crucial to survival, and these bonds were often cemented by shared responsibilities, the division of labor, and the ability to work together to solve problems. Social cohesion and cooperation were essential for success in the often dangerous and unpredictable environments early humans inhabited. The larger, more permanent social structures that began to emerge brought with them new forms of organization. While early humans still lived in relative mobility, their social relationships were beginning to shift. In hunter-gatherer groups, social roles were often defined by age, experience, and physical capability. But as these groups grew larger, more defined roles began to emerge. People began to specialize in specific tasks. Some became skilled hunters, others expert gatherers, while some may have taken on the role of toolmakers, healers, or spiritual leaders. These roles were likely not fixed. But over time, as social structures deepened, the division of labor helped facilitate greater cooperation and efficiency. While much of early human life was still defined by the need for survival, the slow development of specialized roles and responsibilities also brought about the beginning of cultural development. As early humans spent more time together, they began to share stories, create rituals, and pass down knowledge. The relationship between these groups and the land was not just physical, it was spiritual. Many early human cultures believed in the concept of animism, a worldview where all natural elements, animals, plants, rocks, even the wind, were imbued with a spirit. Rituals were likely performed to honor these spirits, whether it was to ensure a successful hunt, good weather, or to maintain harmony with the land. These spiritual beliefs played a crucial role in the formation of early cultures, providing early humans with a moral and ethical framework that governed their actions. The development of language played an equally important role in shaping these early human communities. Although the exact timeline for the emergence of language remains a subject of debate, it is clear that language, in its many forms, was a key element in the development of early human societies. Language enabled communication across groups, the sharing of knowledge, and the creation of more sophisticated social structures. The ability to communicate abstract ideas was revolutionary. Early humans could pass down stories, convey complex instructions, and express emotions in a way that no other species could. It also allowed for the coordination of larger, more organized efforts, whether in hunting, defense, or ritual. With language came the ability to convey ideas about the past, present, and future. Early humans could tell stories, creating the first form of history and mythology, and pass down information about survival, which could be used to improve the odds for the next generation. The ability to organize and collaborate in more complex ways was crucial to the survival of early humans, but so was their ability to adapt to the challenges they faced. As human groups grew, so did the need for cooperation. But this also meant that there were tensions to navigate. With larger groups came potential conflicts, disagreements over territory, resources, or leadership. This is where the concept of social hierarchies began to emerge, and the idea of social bonds became more complex. It is likely that early humans developed a rudimentary form of social order to handle disputes and ensure that larger groups could function effectively. Early leaders, perhaps the most experienced or the strongest, may have played a central role in maintaining peace and guiding the group in times of crisis. One of the most important changes that began to occur was the shift toward more permanent settlements. While humans had always been mobile, following the herds of animals or the seasonal availability of food, certain groups began to settle in one place for extended periods of time. This shift was prompted by changes in the environment and the development of early agricultural practices. The domestication of plants and animals marked a major turning point in human history. It was a slow process, one that spanned thousands of years, but it eventually led to a steady, reliable food source that allowed human groups to stay in one place. While early agriculture may have started as a means to supplement hunting and gathering, over time it became the backbone of human civilization. The ability to grow food in one place, rather than constantly foraging or hunting, allowed early human communities to expand. Permanent settlements began to appear, marking the transition from nomadic life to more complex societies. These settlements, which eventually grew into villages and towns, laid the foundation for the rise of cities and civilizations. With the ability to stay in one place, human groups could build more substantial structures, develop trade networks, and begin to specialize in various crafts. The creation of surplus food allowed individuals to focus on tasks other than food production, enabling the development of trade, art, and culture. But this shift was not without its consequences. The move toward agriculture and the settling of human groups led to the rise of inequalities. As some individuals or groups accumulated wealth through the control of land or resources, social stratification became more pronounced. The accumulation of surplus food and other resources also created new challenges: how to protect those resources, how to manage conflicts, and how to ensure the stability of the community. These early stages of settlement and agriculture laid the groundwork for the complex social, political, and economic structures that would eventually characterize the rise of cities and civilizations. The increasing sophistication of early human society did not erase the challenges that came with survival. Early humans still had to contend with unpredictable weather, scarcity, and the constant threat of predators. Yet, as they adapted to the land and began to alter it to suit their needs, they also began to lay the foundations of a civilization that would eventually change the world. Through their innovations, their ability to cooperate, and their mastery over fire, tools, and the environment, early humans not only survived but thrived. Theirs was not an easy existence, but it was one that was marked by ingenuity, resilience, and a growing understanding of the world around them. This adaptability, this constant dance with nature, where humans both shaped and were shaped by the land, set the stage for all that was to come. As early humans began to settle into more permanent environments, a fundamental shift occurred not only in how they lived, but in how they thought about their place in the world. The transition from a purely survival-based existence to one that involved long-term planning and cooperation created the groundwork for the development of early civilizations. What began as small, mobile groups of hunters and gatherers slowly transformed into communities that had the capacity to build, store, and manage resources. These changes were not just about the physical environment they inhabited, but about how humans began to perceive their own potential. A new sense of time and space emerged, one that was tied not just to the immediate needs of survival, but to broader concepts like ownership, social structures, and the idea of permanence. For the first time, human communities could see themselves not just as part of nature, but as stewards of the land. This development brought with it a new challenge. Managing the resources that had once been shared freely by the land itself was no longer just a source of food and shelter. It was something that could be shaped, cultivated, and passed down through generations. This shift from a more egalitarian use of resources to one focused on ownership, control, and agriculture marked the beginning of a transformation that would forever alter the course of human history. Agriculture was not a single event, but a gradual evolution, one that took place over thousands of years. As early humans began to experiment with the domestication of plants and animals, they started to see the advantages of staying in one place, rather than constantly following migratory patterns. The first crops likely came from wild grasses that humans began to cultivate intentionally, with early varieties of wheat, barley, and rice gradually being planted near their homes. The domestication of animals followed a similar path. The wild ancestors of sheep, goats, and cattle were tamed for their meat, milk, wool, and labor, and these animals provided early humans with more reliable food sources than hunting ever could. At the same time, early humans began to develop more permanent structures for living, while previous generations had relied on temporary shelters made from branches, hides, and stone. The advent of agriculture allowed people to invest in more substantial dwellings. The first true houses, made from mud, stone, or timber, began to appear. These homes were not just shelters, but expressions of stability. They represented an early form of ownership, as they were built on land that was cultivated and maintained. The growing sense of permanence in these settlements was reflected in the layout of the villages themselves. Instead of random, haphazard arrangements, settlements began to show signs of organization, with roads, communal spaces, and designated areas for agriculture. This new way of living required new ways of thinking and organizing. Early human societies began to form social structures that reflected the importance of managing resources. No longer were all members of a group equal in terms of access to food, shelter, and other necessities. The division of labor became more pronounced, with certain individuals specializing in farming, while others took on roles as toolmakers, healers, or leaders. The more permanent nature of these settlements meant that people could invest time and effort into activities beyond mere survival, like the creation of art, the development of new technologies, and the formation of early religious practices. The rise of agriculture also brought with it the need for a different type of relationship with the environment. Instead of living in a constant cycle of hunting and gathering, early humans were now engaged in a long-term, ongoing interaction with the land they cultivated. This interaction required not only physical labor, but also a deep understanding of the cycles of nature. Farmers had to learn how to plant crops at the right time, how to irrigate their fields, and how to protect their crops from pests. They had to understand the rhythms of the seasons and know when to harvest. The relationship between early humans and the land was no longer one of mere survival, but one of cultivation, management, and stewardship. With the growth of agriculture, the population of these early settlements began to increase. The ability to produce surplus food meant that more people could be supported, and as populations grew, so did the need for systems of organization. This led to the rise of leadership roles, with certain individuals becoming responsible for overseeing the community's well-being, managing disputes, and ensuring that resources were used wisely. In some cases, these leaders may have been chosen for their experience or wisdom, while in others, leadership may have been determined by physical prowess or lineage. This early form of leadership laid the foundation for more complex political structures that would develop over time. As human societies began to grow in size and complexity, so too did the need for trade. While agriculture could provide for the basic needs of a community, there were always things that were either unavailable or difficult to obtain locally. Early humans began to trade goods like food, textiles, and tools with neighboring groups. and these exchanges were often essential for survival. The advent of trade networks not only helped secure the necessary resources for communities, but it also encouraged the spread of new ideas and technologies. Knowledge about agriculture, toolmaking, and pottery, for example, spread across regions as different groups came into contact with one another. Trade also created the need for systems of communication, leading to the development of early forms of writing, which allowed people to record transactions, exchange knowledge, and preserve their culture. Religion also began to play a more prominent role in these developing societies. As humans settled into more permanent communities, they began to reflect more on their place in the world and the forces that governed their lives. Early religious beliefs were closely tied to the land and to the cycles of nature. The planting and harvesting of crops were often seen as sacred acts, and rituals were performed to ensure a bountiful harvest or to seek protection from bad weather or pests. Religion was not just a set of beliefs, but a social glue that helped bind communities together, provided a moral and ethical framework that governed how people interacted with one another, how they viewed the natural world, and how they understood the forces of life and death. The development of early agriculture and permanent settlements led to a profound shift in how humans viewed their relationship with the land, with each other, and with the divine. In many ways, this shift marked the end of the nomadic, egalitarian existence of hunter-gatherers and the beginning of the stratified, hierarchical societies that would eventually give rise to cities, kingdoms, and empires. The ability to cultivate food, build permanent shelters, and create surplus goods allowed human societies to grow and evolve in ways that had not been possible before. But this shift came with its own set of challenges. The growth of agriculture required new forms of labor, which led to the division of work and, eventually, to social inequality. As certain individuals or groups became more skilled in farming or resource management, they gained access to more land and wealth, while others were left with less. This created the beginnings of social stratification, an inequality that would become more pronounced as societies grew larger. In many early civilizations, this stratification took the form of a ruling elite who controlled the land, the labor, and the resources, while the majority of people worked the land and provided for the community's needs. The rise of agriculture and permanent settlements also brought with it the need for defense. As communities grew in size and resources, they became more vulnerable to attacks from neighboring groups. Early humans began to build walls and fortifications around their settlements to protect themselves from external threats. The development of these early defenses marked the beginning of more organized forms of warfare, as human groups started to fight for control over land, resources, and power. Despite these challenges, the early development of agriculture, permanent settlements, and social organization marked a pivotal moment in the history of humanity. It was the foundation upon which all subsequent civilizations would be built, and it set the stage for the development of complex societies with systems of governance, trade, religion, and culture. These early societies, while small by modern standards, were the birthplace of many of the ideas and systems that continue to shape our world today. The journey from survival to civilization was long, fraught with challenges, but it was also marked by immense creativity, innovation, and the unrelenting drive to shape the world around them. As early humans began to leave behind their nomadic past, they began to build the foundation for a future that would one day reach far beyond the confines of the land they once knew. As early humans began to establish more permanent communities and societies, their understanding of the world deepened in ways that would forever alter their existence. The innovations they developed, from tools to agriculture, had already laid the foundation for their survival. But as these groups grew and began to form more structured social systems, the need for even greater organization, communication, and regulation became apparent. This growing complexity began to manifest itself in various aspects of human life. But one of the most crucial developments during this time was the formation of early systems of governance. How could such disparate, increasingly sophisticated communities maintain order, resolve disputes, and ensure cooperation among a growing population? At its core, the early societies were built around a single, simple principle: cooperation. Without cooperation, survival would have been impossible. But as communities grew larger, cooperation became more complicated. Early humans had to address questions of leadership, justice, and the distribution of resources. Some groups may have looked to leaders who were wise and experienced, while others may have turned to the strongest or most skilled individuals to provide direction. These early leaders were often not kings or rulers in the way we think of today, but they nonetheless played an essential role in guiding their communities through difficult times, whether by making decisions in the face of conflict or helping to organize labor for communal projects. This early form of leadership was deeply rooted in the idea of mutual respect, necessity, and respect for the natural world. But as settlements grew and populations swelled, this informal leadership would give way to something more formal and structured. This transition marked the beginning of social hierarchies, structured systems of power and control that would define the next stages of human development. The emergence of social hierarchies was not a simple or sudden shift, but rather a gradual process. As agricultural practices grew more complex, societies found themselves accumulating surplus goods and resources. With the ability to store food for the future came the question of who controlled these resources, who decided who would have access to food, tools, and other essentials, and what would happen when there were disputes or competition for these resources. The need for systems of regulation became clear, and as a result, early forms of governance began to emerge. The first forms of governance were often based on kinship and tribal ties, where power was shared or held by those with the most experience, knowledge, or physical prowess. These early leaders, though not rulers in the strictest sense, would have played an integral role in maintaining peace, organizing communal activities like harvests or hunts, and making decisions about the use of resources. In smaller groups, these leaders were often elected or chosen based on their reputation, their wisdom, or their ability to command respect. Over time, however, the increasing complexity of society and the growth of settlements made these informal systems of leadership less effective. This shift toward more formal governance systems marked a turning point in human history. As early humans began to recognize the need for more structured leadership, they began to experiment with new ways of organizing their communities. In some cases, this led to the rise of powerful leaders who took on more centralized roles. These leaders might have been religious figures, military commanders, or influential community members who held significant power and authority. While these leaders were still closely tied to their communities, their roles became more formalized, and their authority became more institutionalized. The need for greater organization and leadership also gave rise to new forms of social stratification. As early human societies began to settle in one place, certain individuals or groups were able to accumulate more wealth, land, or resources than others. With this accumulation came the development of social classes, which began to divide societies into distinct groups. The wealthy and powerful could command labor, control trade, and build larger, more permanent structures. Meanwhile, those with fewer resources became more dependent on the social hierarchy, and their roles became more defined by their position within that structure. This growing inequality was often justified by cultural or religious beliefs. In many early human societies, the idea of a divine right to rule, or the belief in the spiritual significance of certain individuals, played a key role in legitimizing the power of leaders. Early kings, chiefs, or tribal leaders were often seen as divinely chosen or directly connected to the gods. This not only solidified their authority, but also reinforced social divisions. The belief that rulers were divinely appointed helped maintain the idea of hierarchy, making it more difficult for lower status individuals to challenge the established order. While these early leaders often relied on religious or spiritual authority to justify their power, another key element of governance was the establishment of laws and codes of conduct. As societies grew, so too did the need for systems of justice. How could disputes between individuals or groups be resolved fairly? How could leaders maintain order without resorting to violence or chaos? In response to these needs, the first systems of law began to emerge. The development of early laws was tied to the growth of cities and permanent settlements. Cities, by their very nature, required more complex systems of regulation. With large populations came new types of conflicts, whether over resources, land, or personal relationships. Early legal codes, like the ones developed in Mesopotamia and ancient Egypt, began to establish rules for trade, property rights, and punishment for crimes. These laws, often written down and codified for the first time, provided a means of ensuring stability and fairness in increasingly complex societies. They also helped to establish a sense of justice, allowing individuals to understand their rights and responsibilities within the larger community. As the concept of governance evolved, so too did the relationship between leaders and the people they governed. Early humans, especially in growing urban centers, began to develop more sophisticated systems of communication with the need to record transactions, manage trade, and organize labor. The written word became an essential tool for governance. Early forms of writing, such as cuneiform in Mesopotamia or hieroglyphs in Egypt, allowed leaders to keep records of laws, contracts, and trade agreements. These written records were also instrumental in the development of religious texts, mythologies, and cultural practices, which further solidified the role of governance in daily life. The development of governance, social hierarchy, and the codification of law were key elements in the transition from early human societies to the first civilizations. They helped structure society, create systems of organization, and provide the stability needed for these communities to grow and thrive. However, this growth was not without its challenges. The rise of social inequality, the concentration of power in the hands of a few, and the establishment of rigid social structures created tensions that would continue to shape human history for centuries to come. Despite these challenges, the emergence of governance systems in early human societies represented a profound leap forward in the development of civilization. It was through these systems of leadership, law, and social hierarchy that early humans were able to create the first large-scale communities, ones that could build cities, develop trade networks, and engage in complex cultural, religious, and political practices. These early experiments in governance laid the groundwork for the future development of civilizations across the globe, shaping the way that human societies would organize themselves for millennia to come. Through cooperation, organization, and regulation, early humans were able to build communities that not only survived but thrived, communities that would become the foundation of the modern world. As the societies of early humans began to evolve and grow more complex, one of the most transformative changes was the shift from a subsistence economy to a more diversified and eventually more specialized economic structure. This transition marked a crucial turning point in the trajectory of human civilization, one that laid the groundwork for the rise of cities, trade networks, and the division of labor. With the development of agriculture, permanent settlements, and emerging systems of governance, early humans began to interact with their environment in ways that went beyond basic survival. They started to shape their world to better meet their needs. And this shift would have profound implications for the future of human society. The idea of specialization, focusing on specific tasks or roles, began to emerge as societies grew in size. Early human communities had been largely self-sufficient, where every member contributed to the fundamental needs of the group, such as food, shelter, and safety. Everyone hunted, gathered, and contributed to the communal well-being. But as agriculture allowed for surplus production, this all began to change. Surplus food meant that not everyone needed to be directly involved in food production anymore. This shift gave rise to the possibility of specialization. While some people continued to farm, others began to take on different roles within the community, such as crafting tools, pottery, weaving textiles, or working with metals. The advent of specialization was not an instantaneous transformation. It was a gradual process that happened over generations. With the ability to accumulate more goods, certain people began to take on jobs that were outside of the immediate needs of the group. For example, skilled artisans and craftsmen emerged as a crucial part of early societies as humans began to develop tools and implements beyond what they could easily create themselves. The need for specialized knowledge and expertise grew. Pottery, for instance, became a necessary skill for storage, cooking, and transport. As pottery making skills improved, Artisans could produce more durable and sophisticated vessels, which were highly valued by communities. These specialized crafts eventually evolved into full-time occupations, where individuals dedicated their lives to perfecting their trade. Alongside specialized crafts, the rise of trade networks became a key factor in the expansion and prosperity of early societies. As people began to settle into permanent villages and towns, they quickly realized that not all the resources they needed were available locally. Trade, both within the community and with neighboring groups, became essential. Surplus goods, such as grain, pottery, and textiles, could be exchanged for things that were in short supply, like metals, exotic goods, or rare materials. This exchange created a web of interconnected communities, each specializing in particular goods and services. Trade itself was more than just a transaction of goods. It was a social and cultural exchange. As humans began to trade with distant communities, they were exposed to new ideas, technologies, and cultural practices. They learned about new ways of farming, crafting, and even governing. The exchange of goods opened up the possibility for communication across great distances, linking different societies and fostering a sense of shared human experience. This early network of trade laid the foundation for the rise of powerful cities and states that would later dominate the ancient world. The relationship between these early societies and trade networks was symbiotic. As communities grew larger and wealthier, they required more complex systems of governance to manage resources and trade. Leaders were needed not only to maintain social order, but also to facilitate trade agreements, protect routes, and ensure that resources were distributed fairly. In early city-states, these roles often merged, and leaders were expected to act as both political authorities and economic managers. They controlled the flow of goods, determined tariffs, and helped establish trade agreements with neighboring groups. The rise of trade also had profound implications for the development of early economies. Communities began to accumulate wealth in the form of goods, livestock, and, eventually, precious metals such as gold and silver. With wealth came the need for more advanced systems of accounting and record keeping. Early forms of writing, such as the cuneiform script of Mesopotamia, were initially developed for the purpose of keeping track of transactions and inventories. These early records were not just practical tools. They became instruments of governance, enabling leaders to manage resources more effectively and ensuring the transparency of transactions. In this way, the development of early writing systems was deeply tied to the growth of economies and trade networks. Alongside the rise of specialized labor and trade, the increase in agricultural productivity allowed for a larger and more complex social structure. With more food available, populations grew, and new social dynamics began to take shape. The division of labor became more pronounced, as people no longer needed to spend all their time farming or gathering food. Instead, they could dedicate themselves to a wide range of activities that enhanced the quality of life for the community. These activities ranged from the construction of public works, such as irrigation systems, roads, and defensive walls, to cultural practices, such as the creation of art, music, and literature. The rise of cities, with their impressive architectural structures, marks one of the most visible aspects of this newfound complexity. The construction of monumental structures like temples, palaces, and tombs was a direct reflection of the wealth and resources that these societies had accumulated. But with this wealth and complexity came new challenges. As early human societies grew larger and more sophisticated, the differences between the rich and the poor became more pronounced. While some families accumulated large amounts of land and resources, others remained dependent on the labor of others. The emergence of social hierarchies became more rigid, with leaders and elites occupying privileged positions at the top of the social structure. These divisions were not limited to wealth alone. They extended to the division of labor, with certain groups, such as priests, military leaders, and rulers, occupying higher status positions than farmers, laborers, and artisans. The tension between these social classes was not always peaceful. As early societies began to accumulate wealth and resources, conflicts over land, labor, and power became inevitable. Wars over territory, resources, and trade routes became more frequent as different groups vied for control. Early civilizations, such as those in Mesopotamia and Egypt, saw the rise of military leaders who used force to expand their influence and secure their resources. This marked the beginning of organized warfare and the creation of armies. One of the most enduring legacies of early civilization, military campaigns were not just about acquiring land, but about securing the economic base of the society itself. Control over fertile land, trade routes, and resources was crucial for maintaining power and stability. Alongside these military conflicts, internal struggles within early societies also became more common. As hierarchies became more entrenched, there was increasing tension between the elite and the common people. Revolts, protests, and uprisings were not uncommon in early civilizations, as those at the bottom of the social ladder sought to challenge the status quo. These movements were often led by individuals who sought to redistribute wealth and power, though they rarely succeeded in toppling the entrenched systems of power. Instead, such movements often led to the consolidation of power by a more centralized leadership, with the elites finding ways to co-opt or suppress the uprisings. Despite these tensions, the overall effect of the rise of agriculture, trade, and specialization was one of profound change. Early human societies, which once consisted of small, mobile bands of hunter-gatherers, had transformed into complex, settled communities with intricate economic, political, and social systems. The development of cities, the rise of trade networks, the specialization of labor, and the creation of centralized governance all marked the beginning of a new era in human history, an era that would eventually give rise to empires, kingdoms, and the global world we know today. This shift from subsistence to surplus was not just an economic change, it was a cultural transformation. It allowed humans to create new systems of governance, new ways of relating to each other, and new opportunities for creativity and innovation. It was through this transformation that early human societies were able to develop some of the most remarkable achievements of the ancient world, from monumental architecture to the birth of written language. It was a slow, gradual evolution, but one that fundamentally altered the course of human history. Through the cultivation of the land, the specialization of labor, and the establishment of trade, early humans set the stage for the rise of the first great civilizations that would shape the course of history for millennia to come. As early human societies evolved, the need for innovation and new ideas became more pressing. The development of agriculture, permanent settlements, and complex social structures created opportunities for early humans to experiment with new technologies, new methods of production, and new ways of interacting with the world around them. But beyond the tangible, practical innovations, these developments also spurred intellectual and cultural changes that would ultimately lay the foundation for many of the ideas and practices that continue to shape the world today. In the early stages of human civilization, the emergence of writing and other forms of record-keeping marked one of the most profound intellectual shifts in history. While early humans had communicated through oral traditions, the development of writing allowed for the recording and transmission of knowledge across generations. This was a monumental step forward for human civilization, as it allowed societies to preserve not just practical knowledge, but also cultural, religious, and philosophical ideas. Writing gave people the ability to record their history, write down laws and codes, and share stories and myths that helped define their world. The earliest forms of writing, such as cuneiform in Mesopotamia and hieroglyphs in Egypt, were primarily used for practical purposes, like keeping records of trade, inventories, and property. However, over time, writing became a more sophisticated tool, used to capture a wider range of ideas. With the ability to write, societies could develop more complex systems of governance, economy, and law. Leaders could codify rules and regulations, making it easier to administer justice, manage resources, and maintain order in growing populations. Writing also allowed for the creation of legal documents, treaties, and contracts, which enabled trade and diplomacy to function on a larger scale. Beyond its practical applications, writing also became an essential vehicle for cultural and intellectual expression. Ancient texts, such as the Epic of Gilgamesh The pyramid texts and the Vedas were not just records of historical events or religious rituals, they were also expressions of the human experience. These texts explored the nature of life and death, the relationship between humans and gods, and the meaning of existence itself. In a sense, these early writings marked the beginning of human philosophy, as people began to ask deep questions about the world and their place in it. In addition to writing, the development of art and architecture was another critical cultural shift. As human societies grew more stable and prosperous, they began to invest in the creation of art, not just for practical purposes, but as a means of expressing identity, power, and belief. In early civilizations, art became a form of communication used to convey political messages, religious symbolism, and cultural values. Temples, palaces, and monumental structures were built, not only as places of worship or governance, but as symbols of the power and wealth of those who commissioned them. Art also played a significant role in shaping religious beliefs and practices. In ancient Egypt, for example, elaborate tombs and burial rituals were designed to honor the dead and ensure a successful journey to the afterlife. The artwork found in these tombs depicted the deceased in idealized forms, conveying a sense of immortality and divine favor. Similarly, the grand structures of Mesopotamian ziggurats and Egyptian pyramids were not just feats of engineering, they were expressions of the divine power of the gods and the kings who built them. These architectural wonders were not only physical structures, but also symbolic representations of human aspirations, expressions of a society's values, beliefs, and understanding of the universe. Alongside the development of art and architecture, early human societies also began to explore new ways of understanding the natural world. The growth of cities and the increased interaction between different cultures led to the exchange of ideas about science, medicine, and technology. Early humans had always interacted with nature, but now they began to observe and experiment in ways that went beyond mere survival. Agriculture itself was a product of human observation, as early farmers began to understand the cycles of the seasons, the patterns of rainfall, and the behavior of plants and animals. This knowledge allowed them to improve crop yields, domesticate animals, and manage the land in ways that ensured the survival of their communities. But the intellectual curiosity of early humans extended beyond the practicalities of farming and resource management. In ancient Mesopotamia, for instance, the Sumerians developed a system of mathematics that allowed them to measure land, calculate trade transactions, and track the movements of the stars. The Egyptians, with their mastery of geometry, built the pyramids with incredible precision, using mathematical principles that would later influence Western thought. In the Indus Valley, the people created sophisticated drainage systems and urban planning techniques that demonstrated an advanced understanding of engineering and sanitation. These early scientific and technological innovations were not isolated. They were part of a broader intellectual movement in which people began to engage with the world in more abstract and systematic ways. The creation of writing, art, and architecture, combined with advances in mathematics, engineering, and medicine, marked the beginning of a new era of human thought. Early human societies were not just surviving, they were beginning to reflect on their place in the world, their relationship to nature, and their understanding of the forces that govern their lives. At the same time, these intellectual and cultural shifts had important social and political implications. As societies grew more complex, the need for organization, regulation, and governance became more pressing. The development of writing and record keeping helped establish systems of law, trade, and taxation, but it also helped to define social roles and hierarchies. In many early civilizations, the elite, including priests, rulers, and military leaders, controlled the flow of knowledge and resources, reinforcing their power and influence over the rest of the population. This division of knowledge was often tied to religious beliefs. In many early societies, the ruling class was believed to have divine authority, and the possession of knowledge was seen as a way of maintaining that divine favor. The priests and scribes of ancient Egypt and Mesopotamia, for example, were seen as intermediaries between the gods and the people. They were the ones who could read and write, interpret divine will, and perform religious rituals that ensured the prosperity and well-being of the society. In this way, knowledge itself became a tool of power, reinforcing the social hierarchies that defined early civilizations. Yet, while knowledge was often controlled by the elite, it was also a source of unity and identity for the broader society. The religious texts, epic poems, and stories that were passed down through generations provided a sense of shared history and purpose. These texts helped define cultural norms, values, and moral codes, serving as both a guide for individual behavior and a means of reinforcing social cohesion. For the people of ancient Mesopotamia, Egypt, or the Indus Valley, their myths and stories were not just entertainment or cultural heritage. They were the foundation of their worldview, providing answers to some of the most profound questions about life, death, and the meaning of existence. This intertwining of knowledge, power, and culture laid the groundwork for the emergence of complex political systems and institutions. As early societies began to form more centralized governments, they needed systems of record-keeping and organization to manage resources, enforce laws, and maintain control. The development of writing, alongside the creation of art and architecture, played an essential role in this process. Leaders could issue decrees, write laws, and communicate their power through inscriptions, monuments, and artistic representations. These symbols of authority helped to solidify their rule and ensure the stability of the society. Yet, even as knowledge became a tool of power, it also began to serve a broader purpose. As humans began to reflect on the world around them, their curiosity expanded beyond the practical. They began to ask not just how to survive, but why they existed, what their purpose was, and what the future held. This intellectual shift marked the beginning of philosophy, as people started to think about the nature of reality, the soul, and the divine. The written word became a vehicle for exploring these questions, and the myths, stories, and religious texts that emerged during this time would serve as the foundation for the philosophical traditions that would later flourish in the ancient world. In this sense, the development of writing and intellectual inquiry was not just about recording facts or creating technologies. It was about seeking meaning. It was about understanding the world, the self, and the cosmos. Early humans were not just building civilizations, they were building ideas that would continue to evolve and shape the trajectory of human history for millennia to come. This period of intellectual and cultural transformation marked the dawn of human civilization, as societies began to engage with the world in more profound and complex ways. They were not only shaping the environment around them, but also beginning to shape the future. The questions they asked and the ideas they developed laid the groundwork for the great civilizations that would follow, and for the intellectual traditions that continue to influence the way we think and live today. Through writing, art, and philosophy, early humans began the journey from mere survival to understanding, and in doing so, they set the stage for everything that was to come. As early human societies became more structured, the need for a deeper understanding of the natural world and the forces that shaped their lives grew ever more pressing. Humans were no longer isolated, roaming bands of hunters and gatherers, but settled communities engaged in agriculture, trade, and complex social systems. With these developments came the inevitable shift in how people viewed their surroundings, not just as a source of survival, but as a world that could be observed, manipulated, and understood. This intellectual transformation began to reveal itself in the growing interest in science, technology, and medicine, which, while rudimentary by modern standards, formed the foundation of human progress. Earliest scientific endeavors were often driven by necessity. As agricultural societies flourished, humans needed to better understand the rhythms of the land. Seasons had to be predicted with greater accuracy. Planting and harvesting times were dictated by natural cycles, and the storage of surplus food required knowledge of preservation techniques. Early humans developed a practical understanding of the environment as they learned to manage water resources, care for domesticated animals, and cultivate crops. They observed patterns in the natural world and adapted their behaviors accordingly. But these practices were often based on trial and error, passed down through generations via oral traditions rather than the scientific method we recognize today. One of the most significant innovations born from this need for agricultural management was the invention of the calendar. Ancient civilizations, like those of Mesopotamia and Egypt, began to track the movement of celestial bodies and developed systems to measure time. The Egyptians, for example, closely observed the annual flooding of the Nile River, which brought fertile silt and allowed them to grow crops. This cyclical event dictated their agricultural calendar, and they created a solar calendar based on the movement of the sun. Similarly, the Sumerians in Mesopotamia developed a lunar calendar based on the cycles of the moon. These early systems were not just practical tools for farmers, they were essential for organizing religious festivals, trade, and governance. The creation of calendars marked an important milestone in the human drive to understand and control time, a precursor to the more sophisticated scientific systems that would emerge in the centuries to come. Alongside these agricultural advancements, early humans began to experiment with medicine. While their understanding of the human body and disease was still primitive, they were beginning to develop practices aimed at healing and alleviating suffering. The Egyptians, known for their advances in medicine, developed detailed knowledge about anatomy and medical treatments. They understood the importance of hygiene and practiced methods of treating wounds, setting bones, and even performing surgery such as trepanation, where a hole was drilled into the skull to treat various conditions. Their medical knowledge was often intertwined with religious beliefs, as they believed illness could be caused by supernatural forces, and healing was often seen as a divine act. Despite the limited scientific knowledge available, these early medical practices laid the groundwork for future advancements in medicine. Similarly, the Sumerians and Babylonians made significant contributions to the field of medicine, particularly in the realm of diagnostics. They created detailed records of symptoms, diseases, and remedies, often organizing them into medical texts that could be consulted by physicians. These ancient texts provide us with glimpses of early diagnostic procedures, such as the observation of physical symptoms and the use of herbal remedies. Though their understanding of disease was rooted in mystical explanations, often attributing illness to divine punishment or demonic influence, their focus on empirical observation and documentation was a precursor to more systematic medical practices. But it was not only in agriculture and medicine that early humans began to develop a more scientific outlook. As societies grew more complex, they also began to explore the broader natural world. The invention of the wheel, for example, revolutionized transportation and trade, allowing humans to move goods and people more efficiently. This seemingly simple tool had far-reaching consequences for the development of cities and economies. Similarly, the early use of metal tools, particularly copper, bronze, and eventually iron, transformed the way humans worked with the environment. These metals were used to create weapons, agricultural tools, and architectural elements that helped shape early civilizations. The rise of metallurgy also had a profound impact on the development of social structures. The extraction and smelting of metal ores required specialized knowledge and skills, and as such, the role of the metalworker became a highly valued profession in many early societies. The ability to control metal resources gave certain individuals or groups immense power, as metal tools and weapons were crucial to both daily life and military endeavors. The mastery of metallurgy was often associated with the divine or supernatural, and in some cultures, metalworkers were regarded as possessing special knowledge that gave them a distinct social status. This connection between technology and social hierarchy was one of the ways in which early civilizations began to structure themselves around specialized knowledge and labor. In addition to practical applications, early humans began to question the nature of the universe and their place within it. This curiosity gave rise to early forms of philosophy and cosmology. In Mesopotamia, for example, the Babylonians created detailed star charts and developed an understanding of astronomy that enabled them to predict eclipses and other celestial events. They believed that the movement of the stars and planets was intimately connected with the fate of humans, and they used this knowledge for both practical purposes, such as timing agricultural activities and religious rituals. The Babylonians, along with the Sumerians, believed in a pantheon of gods who controlled the forces of nature, and they saw the universe as a reflection of divine order. These early cosmological ideas were not just a product of religious belief, but were also based on careful observation of the heavens. Similarly, in ancient Egypt, the stars and planets played a central role in religious and cultural life. The Egyptians aligned their pyramids and temples with the stars, believing that the positions of celestial bodies held deep significance for both life on Earth and the afterlife. The concept of the Duat, or the Egyptian underworld, was linked to the stars, with the sun god Ra traveling through the night sky during his journey to the afterlife. The Egyptian focus on the stars and the cosmos reflects their deep philosophical engagement with the universe, as they sought to understand not only the cycles of nature, but the forces that governed life and death. While early human societies were often rooted in religious or spiritual explanations for natural phenomena, there was also a growing tendency to view the world through a more rational, empirical lens. In Mesopotamia, for example, the early Sumerians began to develop mathematical systems that allowed them to measure land, build structures, and track time. The use of numbers and geometry in construction and agriculture was crucial for organizing society, and it also allowed for the creation of more advanced technologies. This practical application of mathematics marked the beginning of a more analytical approach to understanding the world. In addition to mathematics, early humans also began to engage with the natural world through the study of biology and ecology. While their knowledge of plants and animals was still rudimentary, early societies were already developing ways to classify and understand the living world around them. The domestication of animals, for example, was a direct result of human observation and experimentation. The ability to tame wild animals, such as goats, sheep, and cattle, was crucial for the development of agriculture and allowed humans to secure a stable food supply. Similarly, the cultivation of crops required a deep understanding of plant life, as early farmers learned to select the best seeds, manage irrigation, and protect crops from pests. These early advancements in the understanding of the natural world set the stage for more sophisticated scientific endeavors in the future. As human societies grew more interconnected through trade and conquest, the exchange of knowledge became increasingly common. The scientific, medical, and philosophical ideas that emerged in Mesopotamia, Egypt, and the Indus Valley would eventually spread across the ancient world, influencing the development of later civilizations in Greece, Rome, and beyond. In many ways, the intellectual and scientific advancements of early human societies were not just about survival or practical knowledge. They were about the quest for meaning. Early humans sought to understand the forces that shaped their world, from the movements of the stars to the nature of life and death. They looked for patterns in the natural world, trying to decipher the order behind the chaos, and they began to see themselves not just as passive participants in nature, but as active agents capable of shaping their own destiny. This intellectual curiosity, coupled with the technological and social advancements of the time, laid the foundation for the scientific revolutions that would take place millennia later. As early human societies advanced, they moved from survival to understanding, from a focus on immediate needs to a quest for knowledge that would span the ages. This transition marked the beginning of a broader, more complex engagement with the natural world. It was an engagement that would continue to evolve as new discoveries, technologies, and ideas shaped the course of human history. But at its core, the scientific and intellectual journey of early humanity was always about more than just survival. It was about meaning, exploration, and the quest to understand the universe and our place within it. As human societies grew, so too did the intricacies of their social, cultural, and spiritual worlds. The birth of civilizations in Mesopotamia, Egypt, the Indus Valley, and other ancient regions was marked not just by technological innovations or agricultural advancements, but also by the development of complex belief systems. These systems were essential to understanding the universe, human nature, and the forces that governed life and death. Religion, in its many forms, became a central pillar in early human societies. It influenced every facet of life, from governance and social structures to art, literature, and daily rituals. The role of religion in these societies cannot be overstated. For the first time, humans were able to conceptualize an ordered, often divine, cosmos that connected the mundane world with a higher, transcendent realm. Spiritual beliefs became a framework through which people explained the natural phenomena they observed, understood their place in the world, and made sense of their experiences. From the beginning of recorded history, religious practices and institutions played an essential role in shaping the collective identity of civilizations and providing a sense of stability and meaning. In early Mesopotamian society, the pantheon of gods was both vast and intricate, reflecting the complexity of life itself. The Sumerians, for example, worshipped a wide array of gods who were believed to govern natural forces and human affairs alike. Each city-state had its own patron deity, and temples dedicated to these gods served as the central hubs of social and economic life. In fact, the ziggurat-stepped pyramids that housed the temples were some of the most impressive structures of the ancient world. These temples not only symbolized divine power, but also served as places where wealth was accumulated and redistributed. Priest kings, who were both religious leaders and political rulers, held considerable authority, and their role in mediating between the gods and the people was integral to the functioning of society. The Sumerians believed that the gods controlled everything from the weather to the fate of individuals, and the king, as the intermediary between the divine and the human, was charged with maintaining divine favor. The gods' wills were thought to be revealed through omens, which priests and diviners would interpret to guide the decisions of rulers and the people. This relationship between religion and governance became a defining characteristic of early civilizations, where the lines between the spiritual and the political were often blurred. In many cases, the success of a ruler was seen as directly linked to their ability to appease the gods, ensuring prosperity, fertility, and protection for their people. Similarly, the Egyptians viewed their rulers, the pharaohs, as divine figures. The pharaoh was not just the political leader, but was also considered a living god on earth, a direct link between the gods and the people. The Egyptians' belief in the divine right of kings was central to their understanding of authority and governance. The construction of the pyramids and grand burial tombs, such as those in the Valley of the Kings, reflected this belief in the eternal nature of the pharaoh's rule. These monumental structures were designed to ensure that the king's soul would live on in the afterlife, where he would continue to govern the people as an immortal god. The Egyptians' view of the afterlife was intricately tied to their religious beliefs. They believed in a divine judgment after death, where one's soul would be weighed against the feather of Maat, the goddess of truth and justice. If the heart was found to be lighter than the feather, the soul would live eternally in a paradise. But if it was heavy with sin, it would be devoured by the monstrous Amit, casting the soul into oblivion. The religious systems in both Mesopotamia and Egypt were polytheistic, acknowledging a variety of deities who embodied different aspects of the natural world and human experience. These gods were often anthropomorphic, taking human forms and displaying human emotions, and their relationships with each other mirrored the social dynamics of the people who worshipped them. The pantheon in each society was not a static entity, but one that evolved over time, with new gods and goddesses being introduced, and old ones falling out of favor. The Mesopotamians, for example, later incorporated gods from other regions into their pantheon as their empire expanded. Similarly, the Egyptians' religious beliefs evolved throughout their long history, with different gods becoming more or less prominent at various points in time. Yet, despite these shifts, the core principles of polytheism remained central to both cultures' spiritual lives. In the Indus Valley, while much less is known about their religious beliefs due to the limited deciphering of their script, evidence suggests that religion played an important role in daily life. The archaeological record reveals numerous seals and figurines depicting animals, fertility symbols, and deities, suggesting that the people of the Indus Valley had a deep connection to nature and a belief in supernatural forces. The Great Bath at Mohenjo-Daro, for example, suggests ritualistic bathing or purification practices, perhaps linked to religious ceremonies or acts of devotion. The emphasis on cleanliness and ritual purity may indicate the importance of religious rites in maintaining the favor of the gods or ensuring the health and prosperity of the community. One of the most striking aspects of early religious systems was their role in reinforcing social order. The gods were seen as both protectors and enforcers of moral behavior. In societies like Mesopotamia and Egypt, the gods were thought to punish transgressions, whether they were crimes against individuals or offenses against the gods themselves. The belief that the divine was always watching created a powerful moral framework that encouraged adherence to societal norms and laws. The notion of divine judgment, particularly in the afterlife, reinforced the importance of living a just and righteous life in the present. At the same time, religion also served as a source of comfort and hope for the people. The Egyptians, for example, believed that the afterlife offered the possibility of eternal peace and fulfillment, providing an escape from the hardships of mortal life. Religious rituals and offerings were seen as a way to ensure favor with the gods, guaranteeing the well-being of the individual and the community. The constant interaction between the divine and the human through prayer, offerings, and rituals helped create a sense of continuity and security in the midst of an uncertain world. However, religion in these early societies was not solely a personal or individual matter. It was intricately woven into the fabric of communal life. Public rituals, festivals, and sacrifices were not just expressions of personal piety, but were seen as essential acts to maintain the balance of the world. The collective worship of gods was a reflection of the social unity within a community. Temples and shrines became focal points for social gatherings, economic exchange, and political power. Leaders and priests often shared a symbiotic relationship, with the priesthood providing spiritual guidance and the ruler ensuring the economic and material well-being of the religious institutions. Despite the dominant role of religion in early civilizations, there were also philosophical undercurrents that began to emerge alongside traditional belief systems. In some cases, these ideas served as a counterpoint to the more organized, institutionalized religions. In the Indus Valley, for example, there is evidence of early forms of meditation and introspection, practices that may have contributed to the development of spiritual philosophies. Similarly, in ancient China, the early traditions of Confucianism and Taoism were beginning to take shape. Although these philosophies would not fully emerge until much later, these traditions, which emphasize the importance of personal virtue, harmony with nature, and the search for wisdom, reflected a growing interest in the inner workings of the human mind and spirit, rather than relying solely on divine intervention. Over time, religious thought continued to evolve. In the millennia following the rise of early civilizations, the religious and philosophical landscapes would continue to change, influenced by trade, conquest, and the exchange of ideas between different cultures. Yet, the centrality of religion in early societies, whether as a means of explaining the world, legitimizing power, or fostering social cohesion, remains one of the defining features of human civilization. What is most striking about the early religious systems of the ancient world is their capacity to unite people across vast territories and diverse cultures. Religion not only shaped how individuals understood their personal lives and deaths, but also structured entire societies, providing a framework for governance, social behavior, and the relationship between the individual and the divine. These belief systems served as both a glue that held communities together and as a force that justified the inequalities and hierarchies that defined much of early society. Thus, while the gods may have seemed distant to some, they were never far from the lives of the people. The divine was present in every aspect of daily life, from the food they ate to the land they farmed, from the architecture they built to the rulers they followed. Religion was not simply an abstract concept. It was an integral part of their reality, shaping how they interacted with the world, with each other, and with the forces they believed governed the universe. The rich tapestry of gods, rituals, and beliefs created a worldview that transcended the mundane and elevated human existence into something that reached for the divine. And it is through these religious systems that early human societies began to make sense of their world, forge lasting bonds, and build the foundations for the great civilizations that would follow. As human societies began to settle into agricultural life and develop complex social structures, they also started to engage in activities that transcended mere survival. These early civilizations were not just about food production, trade, or warfare. They were also about creativity, expression, and the pursuit of deeper meanings. This era marked the birth of art, culture, and intellectual exploration. While the specifics of these activities varied from region to region, the development of art, literature, and early forms of philosophy became universal features of ancient societies in a world that was still defined by harsh survival pressures. These cultural developments offered a sense of continuity, purpose, and identity that went far beyond the practicalities of daily life. In the early stages of civilization, art was often directly tied to religion and ritual. Temples and palaces, which served as both religious and political centers, were adorned with elaborate artwork designed to honor gods, commemorate rulers, and express the values of the society. In Egypt, for instance, the walls of tombs were covered with intricate paintings and carvings depicting the deceased's journey to the afterlife. These artworks were not merely decorative. They were deeply symbolic, intended to provide a bridge between the physical world and the divine. Through these representations, the ancient Egyptians believed they could ensure the survival of the soul in the afterlife and protect the integrity of their cultural identity. Similarly, the Sumerians of Mesopotamia also created art that had both religious and social significance. The famous Standard of Ur, a detailed mosaic found in the ancient city of Ur, provides insight into the Sumerian worldview. It depicts scenes of war and celebration, with a clear emphasis on the divine authority of the king. In Sumerian art, rulers were often depicted as larger-than-life figures, with their physical proportions exaggerated to symbolize their higher status and divine favor. These visual representations reinforced the social hierarchy and were part of a larger cultural effort to legitimize the authority of the ruling class. The art of these early civilizations, though often focused on divine themes, was also a reflection of the material and social world. In Mesopotamia, for example, the early use of seals and cylinders was essential for record keeping and trade. These artifacts were intricately designed, often depicting animals, deities, or mythological figures. The use of seals helped to establish the identity of individuals or groups and played a central role in trade, marking goods as legitimate and offering a sense of security in the economic transactions. Over time, seals and cylinder impressions evolved into more elaborate forms of artistic expression, serving both practical and aesthetic purposes. However, it was not just in religious and political contexts that early civilizations expressed themselves artistically. The advent of writing itself can be seen as a form of intellectual and creative expression. The Sumerians, credited with the creation of cuneiform writing, used it initially for record keeping, but gradually expanded its use to include literature, poetry, and legal texts. One of the most famous examples of early literature is the Epic of Gilgamesh, a long poem that explores themes of friendship, mortality, and the quest for immortality. This work, which dates back to around 200 BCE, is one of the oldest known literary texts in the world and provides deep insights into the human condition. Gilgamesh, the semi-divine hero of the epic, embarks on a journey that mirrors the existential struggles of all humans: the desire for meaning, the fear of death, and the quest for knowledge. The story of Gilgamesh is particularly notable for its reflections on the role of kingship and leadership, as well as its exploration of the relationship between human beings and the divine. Gilgamesh begins as a tyrannical ruler, driven by selfish desires and lacking wisdom. However, through his friendship with Enkidu, a wild man created by the gods, Gilgamesh undergoes a profound transformation. The death of Enkidu serves as a pivotal moment in the epic, forcing Gilgamesh to confront his own mortality. His quest for immortality ultimately leads him to the realization that true wisdom lies in accepting the finite nature of life and finding meaning through human connections and deeds. The Epic of Gilgamesh is not just a story of personal transformation. It is also a window into the values and beliefs of early Mesopotamian society. The themes of friendship, loyalty, and the quest for knowledge were central to their worldview, and these ideas resonated deeply within the context of their culture. The epic also reflects the Mesopotamians' belief in the gods' power over human lives, but it also highlights their understanding of human agency. In a world where divine favor was crucial for success, the Mesopotamians still recognized the importance of personal responsibility, friendship, and wisdom in navigating the challenges of life. In Egypt, literature was equally important in both religious and cultural terms. The pyramid texts, some of the oldest religious writings known, were inscribed into the walls of royal tombs and were intended to ensure a successful journey to the afterlife for the pharaohs. These texts, which contain spells and prayers, reflect the Egyptians' deeply ingrained belief in the afterlife and the divine order of the cosmos. Similarly, the Book of the Dead was a collection of spells and rituals designed to guide the soul of the deceased through the trials of the afterlife, ensuring that it would pass into eternity in the company of the gods. These texts not only functioned as religious tools, but also served to convey a complex system of beliefs about the afterlife, morality, and the nature of existence. The development of writing and the subsequent rise of literature played a transformative role in early human societies. Writing allowed people to preserve knowledge, share ideas, and reflect on the world in ways that were impossible for oral traditions alone. It became a medium through which societies could express their deepest thoughts, record their histories, and pass down their legacies. Writing also became a means of preserving the memory of past rulers and events, ensuring that their achievements would be remembered for generations to come. This ability to record and reflect on the past was crucial for the development of human civilization, as it allowed societies to build upon the achievements of those who came before them. While literature in Mesopotamia and Egypt was often centered around religious, political, or moral themes, other cultures were beginning to explore different forms of creative expression. The people of the Indus Valley, for instance, left behind a rich archaeological record that hints at their interest in symbolism and artistry. Although much of their written language remains undeciphered, their seals, pottery, and figurines reveal a society that valued artistic expression. These artifacts often depicted animals, human figures, and abstract motifs, suggesting that the people of the Indus Valley had a deep connection to nature and the spiritual world. Artistic traditions of the Indus Valley, while not as well documented as those of Mesopotamia or Egypt, indicate that early humans were not just concerned with functional or religious art, but were also exploring abstract ideas and visual representations of the world around them. The use of symmetry, repetition, and intricate patterns in their crafts demonstrates an early understanding of aesthetic principles that would later become more pronounced in other civilizations. As human societies continued to evolve, the role of art, literature, and intellectual exploration expanded beyond religious and functional contexts. The creation of monumental structures, such as the ziggurats of Mesopotamia and the pyramids of Egypt, became expressions of human creativity and ambition. These structures were not just practical buildings, they were symbols of human achievement and the desire to transcend the limitations of mortality. The scale and complexity of these constructions were testaments to the technological and organizational capabilities of early civilizations, as well as to their belief in the power of the divine. Throughout these early stages of civilization, the pursuit of meaning, whether through art, literature, or intellectual inquiry, was a fundamental aspect of human life. Early humans were not just focused on survival or material progress. They were also deeply concerned with understanding their place in the world, the nature of existence, and the mysteries of the universe. This desire for knowledge and self-expression set the foundation for the rich cultural and intellectual traditions that would continue to develop in later civilizations. Art, literature, and intellectual exploration were not just passive reflections of the world. They were active engagements with the world, a way for early humans to make sense of their experiences, express their emotions, and leave a legacy for future generations. These creative endeavors allowed people to engage with the divine, reflect on their mortality, and search for deeper truths. They also helped to shape cultural identities, unify societies, and pass on knowledge from one generation to the next. As these early civilizations progressed, they began to understand that their creative expressions, whether through the written word, visual art, or architectural achievements, could transcend their own lifetimes. Through these works, They could communicate across generations, preserving their ideas, beliefs, and cultural values for posterity. This awareness of the power of creation was one of the most significant aspects of early civilization, as it marked the beginning of humanity's ongoing quest for meaning, connection, and understanding. It was through these creative acts that early societies were able to make sense of a complex world and leave a lasting imprint on the future. As early human societies continued to develop, the need for organization, structure, and cohesion became even more crucial. One of the most significant factors in the success of these burgeoning civilizations was the rise of complex political systems. The shift from tribal or clan-based leadership to organized governance marked a pivotal moment in human history, one that laid the foundation for the state structures and political systems that would dominate for millennia to come. Early civilizations, particularly in Mesopotamia, Egypt, the Indus Valley, and China, developed systems of governance that were not only administrative, but also deeply intertwined with religious and cultural beliefs. The political systems of these early civilizations were not merely designed to manage resources or maintain order. They were often expressions of divine authority and were meant to ensure the prosperity and stability of society. In Mesopotamia, the idea of kingship was central to the functioning of the state. The rulers were seen as the earthly representatives of the gods, tasked with ensuring the well-being of their people by maintaining divine favor. This concept of divine kingship was reinforced by the construction of monumental temples, ziggurats, and palaces, which were both physical expressions of political power and symbolic representations of the ruler's divine mandate. The Sumerian king, for example, was not only a political leader, but also a priestly figure, overseeing religious ceremonies and making offerings to the gods. This dual role of the ruler, both political and religious, was a key feature of Mesopotamian governance and was mirrored in other ancient civilizations as well. The role of religion in governance was particularly evident in the ways that rulers justified their power. In many early civilizations, the king was considered the chosen representative of the gods, and his authority was derived from divine will. This divine right of kings was central to the political ideology of civilizations like Mesopotamia and Egypt. Rulers were often depicted as larger-than-life figures, placed in positions of power and privilege through the grace of the gods. The idea of divine sanction for political power not only helped to legitimize the rule of kings and emperors, but also created a sense of social order, reinforcing the hierarchy that existed in these societies. In Egypt, this divine kingship reached its zenith with the pharaohs, who were regarded as living gods on earth. The pharaoh was not merely a ruler, but a direct intermediary between the gods and the people, responsible for maintaining harmony and order in the universe. The idea of Ma'at, the Egyptian concept of divine order and balance, was central to the pharaoh's rule. It was the pharaoh's duty to uphold Ma'at, ensuring that the land, the people, and the gods remained in balance. This religious duty was reflected in the way the pharaohs governed through the establishment of laws, the construction of monumental architecture, and the performance of elaborate religious rituals. The pharaohs were not only seen as political leaders, but also as the embodiment of divine will, and their reigns were marked by the construction of massive tombs and temples that celebrated their eternal connection to the gods. The role of religion in governance also had practical implications for the organization of society. In both Mesopotamia and Egypt, the state was closely tied to the economy, with the king or pharaoh controlling vast resources and overseeing large-scale agricultural projects, such as the construction of irrigation systems. These projects were not just practical, they were also seen as acts of divine favor. The success of agricultural production was believed to be a reflection of the ruler's ability to maintain the god's favor, and the prosperity of the kingdom was directly linked to the ruler's effectiveness in managing both the land and the divine relationship. In addition to religious ideology, the political systems of these early civilizations were shaped by the need for social and economic organization. As cities grew and populations expanded, the need for law and order became more urgent. In Mesopotamia, the development of written laws was one of the most significant contributions to governance. The most famous example of early law codes is the Code of Hammurabi, created by the Babylonian king Hammurabi in the 18th century BCE. This code, inscribed on a large stone pillar, outlined a set of laws that governed everything from property rights and trade to family relations and criminal justice. The laws were clear and public, meant to be displayed for all to see in order to maintain social order and ensure justice. Although the laws were strict and often harsh, some punishments, such as the death penalty, were meted out for relatively minor offences. They represented an early attempt to create a standardized legal system. The Code of Hammurabi was not just a set of laws, it was also a reflection of the king's divine authority. The preamble to the code begins with an invocation to the gods, asserting that Hammurabi's laws were given to him by the gods in order to establish justice and maintain peace. This intertwining of legal and religious authority was a hallmark of early political systems, where rulers were seen as both the earthly enforcers of law and the divine agents of order. In the Indus Valley, the political systems were likely more decentralized, but there is evidence to suggest that there were some forms of organized governance. The cities of Harappa and Mohenjo-daro, for example, were carefully planned, with advanced drainage systems, standardized brick sizes, and organized streets. This level of urban planning suggests that some form of central authority or coordination was involved in the construction of these cities. However, the absence of written records and the lack of monumental architecture, such as the ziggurats of Mesopotamia or the pyramids of Egypt, makes it difficult to fully understand the political structures of the Indus Valley civilization. Nonetheless, the evidence of urban organization and sophisticated infrastructure suggests that the Indus Valley had a form of governance that was capable of coordinating large-scale projects and ensuring the welfare of its people. In ancient China, the emergence of the Shang dynasty, 1600–1022–46 BCE, marked the beginning of a more centralized form of governance. The Shang kings were seen as intermediaries between the human and divine realms, and their power was legitimized through their role as religious leaders. Like their counterparts in Mesopotamia and Egypt, the Shang rulers performed elaborate rituals and sacrifices to appease the gods and ensure the prosperity of their kingdom. The Shang kings were also responsible for maintaining social order through the establishment of laws and regulations, although much of the legal system was based on customary practices and royal decrees rather than written codes. One of the most distinctive features of early Chinese governance was the use of oracle bones, which were used to communicate with the gods. These bones, typically from animals such as turtles or cattle, were inscribed with questions about matters of state, such as the outcome of battles or the fate of a royal heir, and then heated until they cracked. The cracks were interpreted as answers from the gods, providing the king with divine guidance. This form of divination, while not as structured as the legal codes of Mesopotamia, was an integral part of the Shang political system, and it reinforced the king's role as a divine figure who could communicate directly with the supernatural. The emergence of these early political systems was not simply a matter of necessity. It was also a reflection of the growing complexity of human societies. As populations expanded and cities grew, the need for more organized forms of governance became clear. Early rulers were often faced with the challenge of managing resources, maintaining social order, and ensuring the prosperity of their people. The rise of monumental architecture, legal systems, and religious practices was a direct response to these challenges, and they helped to consolidate power in the hands of rulers who were seen as both political leaders and divine agents. As the political systems of early civilizations evolved, they began to take on more complex and varied forms. In some societies, such as Mesopotamia and Egypt, political power was centralized in the hands of a single ruler, while in others, like the Indus Valley, power may have been more dispersed. Yet, despite these differences, the role of religion in governance remained a common thread, and the idea of divine kingship or divine right was central to the functioning of these early states. The rise of complex political systems also had a profound impact on the social structures of these societies. As rulers gained more power, they needed to establish systems of administration to manage the growing complexity of their societies. Bureaucracies, staffed by scribes and officials, emerged to handle matters such as tax collection, trade regulation, and legal disputes. These administrative systems were essential for maintaining order and stability, and they often required the development of new forms of record keeping, including the widespread use of writing. The development of political systems, legal codes, and administrative structures was crucial for the success of early civilizations. These innovations allowed for the efficient management of resources, the regulation of trade, and the maintenance of social order. At the same time, they reinforced the power of rulers who used their divine authority to legitimize their rule and maintain control over their subjects. In this way, the rise of governance systems in early civilizations laid the foundation for the political systems that would shape human history for centuries to come. As civilizations developed and their political structures became more complex, the role of cities transformed from mere centers of trade and governance to hubs of cultural and intellectual innovation. The rise of urbanization in ancient societies marked a monumental shift in human history, as it was within the walls of these early cities that new ideas, technological advances, and artistic expressions flourished. Cities like Thebes, Harappa, and Mohenjo-Daro became the focal points for not just survival, but for the blossoming of human creativity, reflection, and social interaction. It was in these urban centers that early human beings began to define themselves not only as members of a tribe or clan, but as citizens of a larger, interconnected world. Urbanization brought with it an increasing complexity in social organization. As cities grew, so did the need for sophisticated systems of communication, trade, and governance. The structures of early cities were shaped by the natural environment around them. From the fertile riverbanks of the Nile and the Tigris-Euphrates to the well-planned grids of the Indus Valley. In many cases, the layout of these cities reflected the importance of religion and power. In Mesopotamian cities, for example, the ziggurat, a massive step pyramid-shaped structure, dominated the urban landscape. This structure was both a religious temple and political symbol, embodying the divine authority of the king and his role as the mediator between the gods and the people. The ziggurats were often situated at the heart of the city, physically elevating the rulers closer to the divine realm and symbolically placing them at the center of society's functioning. In ancient Egypt, the cities of Thebes, Memphis, and later Alexandria were similarly organized around monumental architecture that blended religious, political, and economic life. The great temples, such as the Temple of Karnak, were not just places of worship, but also centers of wealth and power. These temples functioned as economic hubs, with priests managing large estates and trading goods, and their influence often extended far beyond religious matters. The pharaoh, who was seen as a living god, maintained divine control over both the religious and administrative activities of these cities, creating a seamless relationship between the sacred and the secular. Egyptian cities were often carefully planned, with streets and structures designed to reflect cosmic order and the pharaoh's divine authority. In the Indus Valley, although there were no monumental religious buildings like the ziggurats or Egyptian temples, the cities of Harappa and Mohenjo-Daro displayed a remarkable degree of urban planning. These cities were characterized by wide streets, well-organized residential areas, and an advanced drainage system that is still considered one of the most sophisticated of the ancient world. The meticulous urban planning suggests a high degree of social organization, with authorities overseeing the construction of public works, the management of resources, and the regulation of trade. The lack of grand religious structures may indicate a more decentralized or less overtly theocratic society, but it also suggests a culture that prioritized practicality and cleanliness, with public baths and a focus on hygiene. The cities themselves, with their grid-like structure and uniformity, reflected a sense of order and efficiency that was essential to the smooth functioning of society. Urbanization also spurred the development of markets and trade networks. Cities became melting pots of cultural exchange, with merchants from different regions coming together to trade goods, ideas, and technologies. In Mesopotamia, trade routes linked the Sumerians with the Indus Valley, Egypt, and even distant regions like Anatolia and the Arabian Peninsula. These trade networks not only allowed for the exchange of valuable materials like metals, textiles, and grains, but also facilitated the spread of cultural and technological innovations. Writing systems, for example, spread from Mesopotamia to other parts of the ancient world through these commercial interactions. The use of cuneiform in Mesopotamia and hieroglyphics in Egypt both influenced and interacted with the development of writing systems in distant civilizations. Similarly, advancements in metallurgy, pottery, and architecture spread along trade routes, contributing to the technological development of early cities. The development of these early trade networks marked a shift in how humans interacted with the world. Instead of isolated communities, early urban centers became interconnected hubs where people from different cultures, languages, and traditions could meet and exchange goods and ideas. This newfound interconnectivity led to the creation of shared cultural spaces where religious practices, artistic expressions, and technological innovations from different regions could be blended and adapted to local contexts. As a result, the cities of the ancient world became crucibles of cultural fusion, where new forms of art, architecture, and intellectual thought emerged. Within these urban spaces, intellectual life flourished. The rise of writing systems enabled the recording and dissemination of ideas across time and space. In Mesopotamia, the development of cuneiform writing allowed for the creation of legal codes, administrative records, and literary works that would influence subsequent generations. The Epic of Gilgamesh, for instance, was not only a work of literature, but also a window into the values and worldview of the Sumerians. Similarly, in Egypt, the use of hieroglyphs allowed for the preservation of religious texts, royal decrees, and historical records that would define the Egyptian civilization for millennia. The production of written texts in both these civilizations facilitated the transmission of knowledge, allowing for the development of schools, libraries, and centers of learning that would later influence classical civilizations such as Greece and Rome. In addition to writing, early cities became centers of scientific observation and discovery. The Egyptians, for example, made significant advancements in medicine, astronomy, and mathematics,